Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Femme Fatale panel with Leigh, Liz, and Angie. I'm just going to hand over to them all to introduce themselves. We'll start with Leigh.
Hi, I'm Leigh Russell, and I write the Geraldine Steele series of crime thrillers. I'm currently writing the 16th in the series, and in each of the books, Geraldine is tracking down a different killer.
Angie.
Yeah, I write Kim Stone books. Book 12 in the series has just been released, Killing Mind. There is a prequel as well. Books are based in the Black Country, which I was told by many traditional publishers not to do. And yeah, she's quite harsh and rude, but she tends to get away with it most of the time. So,
And Liz?
Hi, I write the Gus McGuire series set in Bradford, and I've just started my 7th Gus one. I also write the Nikki Perec series, which is also set in Bradford, and I've just sent the 3rd one off to my publishers. So.
Wonderful. Well, obviously, as you're all on the Femme Fatale panel, I thought we'd start off with talking about your really iconic, strong female characters and what inspired you to create them. So if we start with Leigh again.
My protagonist, Geraldine Steele, has developed throughout the series. What really interests me is the psyche and the motivation of the killer in each of my books. And this is what differentiates each of my books from another, the character of the killer. When I submitted my first manuscript, and it was accepted by a publisher, my editor and my publisher both said to me, I needed to make my detective more interesting. They said, she is the character that readers are going to follow through the series. And so I had to cut some of what I'd written about my killer and bring Geraldine more to the fore. She wasn't really in my head in the beginning, and she's developed as the series has gone along. And I've got to know her alongside the readers, really. I didn't plan out what was going to happen to her because I'd never intended to write a series. I just wrote a story and was fortunate enough to find a fantastic publisher who offered me a 3-book deal. And so Geraldine has grown as the series has developed, and I sometimes think my readers know her better than I do. A lot of readers seem to be very, very involved in her life. And so I had no intention of creating this strong, feisty female detective who has a passion for justice, and her driving force is that she seeks justice for the voiceless dead. But that wasn't in my mind when I started writing. So if you ask me why I initially created her, she just happened. I still can't explain it. I'm sure Liz and Angie will agree. That's the mystery of writing, that you don't always know where it's going to take you. And sometimes things just spark an idea and off you go. And then it's, wow, this is Geraldine Steele. I had no idea this was going to spring out of my head. I've been writing this series for about 10 years now. So, as I say, things have developed, but it was all completely unintentional. There was no grand plan, and I still have no plan, really. I start each book and see where it goes. One day I might fall off the edge of a cliff, but so far so good.
Same to you, Angie.
I think with me, it was in a way it was the other way around. Absolutely agree with what Leigh said about exploring the psychology behind the killer. That is one of my absolute favourite parts of writing. With Kim, really, it was a voice that was in my head for a very long time while I was writing all the books that I thought publishers and agents would like, set in areas that I didn't know. But again, that I thought, other people would like. So this voice was in my head the whole time, but I didn't even like her. because, you know, she sounded so rude and so obnoxious. I thought, my goodness, I can never let this character out onto the page. So really for me, it was the fact that I knew the character's voice, and then I had to sort of like come up with, well, what made her the way that she is. So rather than, you know, having the background first, it was more having the voice and hearing it very clearly. And when it came, exactly like Leigh said, I didn't know how she was going to develop. And when I was writing Silent Scream, the first book, I realised that she was going to dictate how she was going to develop, because I wrote one scene where she was looking at an abandoned children's home through the fence. And it just occurred to me as I was writing, I thought, she wouldn't be happy to just look at it from, you know, outside. She's going to climb that fence. And it changed the scene completely. I had absolutely no intention of climbing the fence and kind of like breaking into the building. But I just knew that that was, you know, what she would do. So in some ways, I'm guided by the character, which sounds ridiculous seeing as, you know, she's in my head, but I am often guided by what she would do. I'll write a scene and I think, no, she wouldn't do that, and I have to change it completely. So it's very strange how these main characters can completely take over and dictate how they want the story to go instead of how you want the story to go. So that's kind of where I am with the character. And like Leigh said, learning new things about her all the time. Each time I write a book, I learn something more about the character, which is really exciting for me, as well as the reader, because I'm often discovering new things about, you know, her personality myself. And like I say, as a writer, that is really exciting.
Liz?
Well, I think in my Gus books, obviously he's male, but Alice, I think I know her better than Gus in some ways, and because she's quite sort of feisty, she's quite young, and I've said before, she's sort of the person that I wish I was a bit more like. But my Nikki books, they're the ones where I really, really have this character that I just love. She's working class, she's of dual heritage, she's strong, she's got kids. In the first book, she was a single parent, and she had to make decisions that sometimes the readers were a bit like, oh, well, she's done that at the expense of her family, and a little bit critical of that. And at first I thought, oh, maybe they're right. And then afterwards I thought, would they apply the same rules if it was a male detective? And I didn't think they would. I think the fact that she's got children makes people expect her to behave differently from a male detective. And I've mellowed her down a little bit. She's now got a partner, so she's not the single parent, but she's still as feisty and kick-ass as she ever was. And I mean, I've just written the third book in the series, and I'll be writing more of them. And like Angie and Leigh have said, there's just, you know, there's just so much to learn about her. She's a very complex character, and that's what I love about her. And like Angie said as well, my books are all set in Bradford, and you know, it's not a sexy place to write. Apparently, I was once at Harrogate, and they do at Harrogate Festival, they do what's it called, a Dragon's Pen. And this particular year I was there, I pitched to Jane Gregory, who's, you know, Val McDermott's agent, and a couple of other people. And this particular agent, I won't say who it was, as soon as I mentioned Bradford, he says, oh, well, that's not sexy. You know, there's what people want to read about Bradford. So, to my everlasting shame, I sort of listed a whole lot of things about Bradford, like Saltaire and Haworth and the Brontes and the Film and Media Museum and the multicultural aspect and all the rest of it. Then later on, I went to the toilets in Harrogate, and there's always a bit of a queue there. And he was leaning on the door outside the women's toilets, and I sort of tapped him on the shoulder, still quite indignant, probably had a couple of glasses of wine, and I said to him, and we've got Gareth Gates. As if that sealed the deal for Bradford, you know. So yeah, that was quite amusing. But I mean, as you say, Angie, I think publishers are becoming a bit more open to exploring different cities and places that perhaps aren't traditionally and accepted as being sexy. But I mean, I think that's a really, really good thing. I don't think we can all be in London, and nobody wants to read always about London. We want to read about other places. So,
well, that moves us on really nicely, actually, because I was going to ask you about your chosen locations for your books, because I know that Angie and Liz, you set yours based where you are, but Leigh, I think you've made yours up, haven't you?
I've moved around a little bit, or Geraldine Steele has moved around a little bit. When I started writing, I knew nothing about what to do. And if you set a book, this is a hint for new writers, if you set a book in a real place, then when the book comes out, you can form links with local bookshops, local libraries, people who live there love it that there's a book set there. And so already you have an audience. Well, I didn't know this. I just found a blank space on the map in Kent and put a town there. So, of course, when my first book came out, there were no local libraries, no local bookshops to contact because the place didn't exist. So Geraldine worked in Kent for a while. She then moved up to London, where I live, partly because I know the territory a bit better, and partly because after 3 books I felt perhaps it was time for me and for Geraldine to have a bit of a change. Working in the Met is a little bit different, has a slightly different feel to it to working in the home counties. And so that was something that I was able to research. And then Geraldine had a sergeant with her in Kent, Ian Peterson. And when she moved to London, some of my readers were a little bit put out because they were rather attached to her sergeant, Ian Peterson. And so he then had his own trilogy, and in which he moved up to York, partly because he wanted to get away from his in-laws, and partly because my husband went to university in York and we loved the city, and it gave me an excuse to keep going back there to do research. So Geraldine was in London, Ian Peterson was up in York. Something then happened in Geraldine's career, which meant she had to leave London. And so she moved up to York. And so there has been a certain kind of symmetry, really, to the way the locations have worked out, because she started working in Kent with Ian. They then went their separate ways, but kept in touch. And so in each of Geraldine's novels, there was a cameo appearance from Ian. And in each of his novels, there was a cameo appearance from Geraldine. And it all got rather complicated. And for somebody as disorganised as me, it's a miracle that it actually worked out more or less. When Geraldine had to leave London, the obvious choice was for her to go up and work with Ian Peterson again. And so that's where they both are now. Although in book 16, which I'm currently writing, I hope it's not a spoiler to say that he then has to go and work in London for some of the time. So the locations have moved around, really, but I've found that in a way it's helped me to keep the thing fresh, because of course every time Geraldine moves, she has a new team around her, and so I had to create her new sergeant, Sam, who's happens to be a lesbian, although that's not an issue in the book, it's just part of who she is. And I did discover then that it's actually more difficult, more challenging to have 2 female characters as the main characters, because of course when Geraldine's working with Ian, it's quite easy to have he said, she said. When you have 2 females, you can't say she said, but you don't want to keep repeating names. So it's just something to be aware of when you're writing, that the choice of characters who are having long conversations does impact a little bit on the way you are able to write. But anyway, so that was a new character who was fun to write, Sam. Of course, Geraldine had to leave her behind when she moved up to York to be with Ian. So yes, it's been a little bit of trotting around the country, really.
Angie, what about your location? I know you stick to the Black Country, which isn't very often written about.
Well, that was the thing. Like I said earlier, you know, that a lot of publishers said that, you know, the location wouldn't work and that kind of thing. And I think in a way, because before I wrote the Kim books. I really was writing women's fiction, and I never thought I could write crime, even though it was my favourite genre to read. And Silent Scream, in a way, was my rebellion book. It was a case of, okay, I'm going to write a book where I want to write it. I'm going to use the character that just, won't shut up in my head. I'll get to about 30,000 words. It'll all die a death. And, fine, at least I know I've tried. And it was probably at that point that it all started to actually fall into place. I had a beginning and I had a rough ending, although I didn't know who the killer was going to be. And it was at about 30,000 words that different ideas started coming, and different twists and different plot lines. And that kind of taught me as well. I'm not a planner. And so with the Black Country, I found that because it's dark and industrial, I think the Tolkien books, they say that Mordor, the dark and nasty Mordor was kind of written after the Black Country. And that suited Kim's personality as well, because she would not be at home set in the Cotswolds. She's way too dark and harsh, and she loves town life and that kind of thing. So her personality is really quite reflected in the setting of the Black Country. But also, I'm really proud of where I'm from, and the fact that I've been able to showcase areas of it is great. But what I do absolutely love is when readers contact me, recognising the locations and that kind of thing. It is brilliant. In Silent Scream, there's a piece of wasteland that figures quite heavily next to a cemetery, which is currently now being actually built on. And I've had photos sent to me by readers saying Kim would not be happy with this. And getting that kind of feedback from local readers is absolutely priceless. So, yeah, for me, the Black Country setting works to, I think, further enhance Kim's dark and moody character.
Before I move on to Liz, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question from Steve Dimmer, Angie. He says he's a big fan of you, and as a Midlander and a Wolves fan, he's a little surprised to find no mention of our local delicacies, e.g. chol or chitterlings, in your books.
I'll see what we can do to remedy that. And can I just say, his posts on the books are absolutely fabulous, and I really do appreciate the support.
Wonderful. Liz, your location is just up the road from me in Bradford.
Yeah, well, some people may have picked up that I'm actually Scottish, but I've lived in Bradford now for longer than I ever lived in Scotland. I've lived here for over 30 years. That probably gives my age away, doesn't it? Anyway, moving on swiftly from that. Yeah, Bradford is just this amazing place. It gets such a lot of bad press, but I think it's an amazing place. I think the people are very similar to Scottish people in that they're very friendly and very open. I met my husband here. We've got kids of dual heritage because my husband's Indian, and so the whole multicultural, the diversity of Bradford is just amazing for me. And I hate the fact that it gets this bad press. So although I'm writing crime fiction, I hope that I'm trying to sort of highlight the humanity that exists within Bradford, as well as this, there's an underbelly of darkness. There is in any big city. But I hope that what my books are doing are saying, look, Bradford's a nice place to be, although there's these crimes going on. And one thing that I decided fairly early on when I started to write the books was that I wasn't going, if I was writing about an unsavoury part or an unsavoury street or whatever, that I wasn't going to name an actual street that existed in Bradford, because, okay, if I want to say, oh, well, it's full of these sort of people or it's full of drug dealers or whatever, I can't say that if that's where people actually live, because that's their homes, and that's not what I'm about. We all know there's streets where there's loads of drug dealers. We all know there's areas where there's loads of drug dealers or prostitution or whatever going on. But I don't want to stigmatise people's homes, so I tried to avoid that. And in my Nikki books, what I've actually done is I've created an estate that doesn't actually exist called Lister Hills. There is an area called Lister Hills, but that estate doesn't exist. And basically what I wanted to do was I wanted to have a white working class estate at one end, and I wanted to have, with council houses, that have been bought or whatever at one end, and I wanted to have the sort of terraced houses of inner city Bradford at the other end. And Nikki, my lead character, lives in one of those terraced houses at one end, so it's like a sort of I shape, with a road going in the two different estates at either side, and I created that because that allowed me the chance to explore areas without offending anybody, hopefully, but still with the essence of Bradford, because estates and places like that exist in Bradford. And somebody I noticed in the comments said, "We have the best curry houses," and you're right, we do.
That was Pat Adams, right?
I don't know what you've got written, but you only have Facebook user at the side here, so I can't identify who's saying what.
It's saying that because it says Facebook user here in the comments, and it's Steve Dimmer who said, "Thanks, Angie, you're a star." So I've got another question that came in before we went live from Jason Kelly. And he's directed it to Angela, but I kind of want the answer from all of you. He said, have you got any plans to write a standalone? And in particular, Angela, he said that he thought Kim was in for a break after all her hard work.
The thing is, at the moment, I'm contracted to write 2 books a year. Up until 16, and so I'm working on 13 now. So trying to write another book over and above that is difficult. I did do it last year to produce the prequel First Blood, which was the surprise book. So trying to fit in an extra one until I finished writing the 16 books is quite difficult. 2 a year suits me great. Any more than that, and I feel like everything suffers as a result, really, because I like to be able to put enough research, and do enough drafts before it goes over to my editor. So I would probably do a standalone at some stage, but not until I've got, to the end of this set of 16.
What about you, Leigh? Would you do a standalone?
I have actually written 2 standalones. I think Jason might have read them for a different publisher. They are psychological thrillers. They're not police procedurals. They're very different, actually, and they were fun to write. In Geraldine Steele novels, the reader follows the investigation mostly through Geraldine's eyes, but also from the killer's point of view and some of the victims' point of view. So the reader does get different takes on what's going on. And sometimes the reader knows more than the detectives do. And sometimes the reader knows something has happened of which the killer is not aware. So that's quite fun to play around with. Just out of interest, I thought I would write a first-person novel, a standalone. And that's very different because, of course, the reader only knows what the narrator knows. And then you have the added in the question of, is the narrator actually totally reliable? So they were great fun to write. I wrote a couple of those, and I probably will write another one. My publisher who published those is keen to have another one, but I only agreed to write one. They wanted, sometimes want multiple book deals, 2, 3 books, but I do 3 book deals, and we're now on to 4 book deals with the Geraldine Steele publisher, because I'm confident that, well, I thought I was anyway, confident that I know what I'm doing there. With standalones, it's just an idea that might come or might not come, and I didn't want to feel the pressure, because I did also write at one point a trilogy for another publisher, and they wanted a 3 book deal, and I had written the first book, and I agreed to the 3 book deal, and then I felt rather under pressure to have to write the next books, and it's only with Geraldine Steele that I'm prepared now to do a multiple book deal. Because I think I can continue with Geraldine Steele. We're planning to go up to 20 books. I'm currently writing number 16. And I always had in mind, it's a bit silly, but I don't know if you know the Cadfile series, and there are 20 of those. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to write a 20-book series. So I probably will write another standalone at some point. I'm pretty sure I will, but it's a question of when the idea pings and when I have time to write it. Because I still find writing is great fun. And I didn't really like it when I felt under pressure. It sort of took the fun out of it, and it took the sheer joy out of it, because I know that Angie and Liz will agree with this. Just from reading their books, I know they'll agree with it, that there is a joy in writing, isn't there? I mean, you can tell when you read Liz and Angie's books, both of them. What I love about their writing is that these are two authors who grab you by the throat from the first page, and you have to keep reading. And there must be that kind of thrill and enthusiasm in the writer to inspire that thrill in the reader. And I think at the point when I felt I was under pressure to write books, I kind of lost that a little bit in the trilogy that I wrote for another publisher. And they didn't want any more from me after that. And I didn't want to write any more for them after. So, and back to the question, yes, I'm sure I will write another standalone at some point. I don't know when it will happen. Thanks for the question, Jason. And I hope you have read my standalones.
It probably has. What about you, Leigh?
Well, yeah, I have ideas all the time for different things, and I had one idea for a standalone after watching a documentary about maybe I shouldn't even tell you this in case anyway, yeah, about a documentary about an adult with special needs who was basically disappeared, and her parents or her carers kept claiming the money for her. And that's I thought, right, okay, where does she go to? Where could, and it's sort of, and that I think would be a standalone if I ever decided to explore that. Having said that, I've got an idea for another series, but it's got to go on hold because I've got Nikki and Gus to juggle. So I really love writing series because I think I love I love planning how to put my characters into jeopardy, how to really push them to the edge of their their abilities, to the very edge of what could happen to them, and put them under that pressure, really sort of ratchet up the tension in that way. And I think when you write a series, for me anyway, you get to know the characters much, much better as you go along. So I fully expect that people would, or readers would, think that the 5th book in my Gus series, for example, was better than the first because my characters have developed and evolved and I've got to know them better. And I feel that way with my Nikki ones, like you can't put everything of your character into that first book. So it's that building it through. So I think for me to write a standalone is probably a little bit unlikely. I think I'd probably end up wanting to try to make it into some sort of series because that's what I enjoy doing.
Wonderful. We've got a question that's come in on the stream that I think it's not got a name. It just says Facebook user, but I think it might be from my dad. That says, are any of you planning to write in a different genre?
I once thought about doing a vampire one. But that would have been a series as well, and it would have been a crime one. It would have been that sort of cross-genre thing. But it's although the idea is still jigging about in my mind, I don't really think I'll ever have the time to do it. So, but it's there in my mind because I love the Sookie Stackhouse books. That's why I blame Charlene Harris for that, because I really, really love those books.
They are fabulous books. Leigh, what about you?
Yeah, I sort of hesitate to confess that my agent currently has a dystopian novel, a historical novel, and a humorous novel that I have written while we've been on lockdown. I think they're currently out on submission. Whether or not we actually find a publisher for any of them, I don't know, because it's a difficult time at the moment, isn't it? And I don't know that lightning will strike twice. But yes, I'm always writing. And sometimes I just need a little break from my crime novels, but I have to keep writing. And so I'll write something entirely different. And at the time when the whole world really was at a very, very stressful moment in time, I started writing just a humorous novel, which is great fun, and I think it's hilarious, and so does my agent. But whether anybody else will, I don't know. My daughter's a great fan of it, and so I've been reading it out to her. But so the answer is yes, I do write in different genres, but whether or not any of what I've written will see the light of day, I don't know.
Right, Angie?
Mine is a short answer, not at the minute, no. I'm still having way too much fun with crime and bodies and, mad serial killers and that kind of thing. So certainly, I wouldn't say never, but certainly no plans at the moment to as I say, because until these 16 books are done, I've got the time to do the two Kingstone books per year.
Can I just say, Angie, never say never, because you don't know. You might wake up tomorrow morning with a light bulb moment and write something totally different, because it can take you like that, can't it?
Absolutely. We all know how these ideas burn, and you can be working on something and you've got an idea for something else, and suddenly what you're working on is just like, oh no, I'm going to have to put that aside, and I'm just going to have to scribble down this idea and get cracking on this. So some ideas just burn more.
Yes.
So, I would never say never.
We've got a question coming on the stream from Stephen Munoz. Is it? I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Stephen. From Stephen Munoz. It comes up as Facebook user on the thing. He says, which crime writers do you follow, and what's your favourite crime novel? Let's start with Leigh.
I never answer a question like, who are my favourite authors, what's my favourite crime novel, because honestly, there are just so many, and the answer can change from day to day. I'm currently reading Marjorie Allingham. I'm going through a Marjorie Allingham binge. There are so many greats. I've already mentioned what I really love about both Angie and Liz, that they're the ultimate page turners, and that is fantastic. And when I feel in that sort of mood, you can't do better than that. I love Jeffrey Deaver, he's so clever. I love Leigh Child just because I know him and he's such a lovely guy and his books are so clever. There are just so many. I enjoy reading Conan Doyle. They're quite hilarious in some ways, because it really shows how much more sophisticated we have become through readers becoming so much more sophisticated. In one of Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories, the villain appears, and he's described, I can quote this because it is just so amazing. The villain appears, and Conan Doyle tells us his face was marked with every evil passion. We couldn't get away with that now, could we? We couldn't introduce our killer saying face marked with every evil passion. He has to be the most unlikely seeming killer in the world. So that's quite fun. But I can't really answer that question. I know it's a cop-out, but there are just so many. And as soon as I finish speaking, I'll think of so many more writers that I could have mentioned. And then, of course, we have Shakespeare, who is possibly the greatest crime writer of all. All of Shakespeare's great plays revolve around a crime, don't they? Hamlet, Othello, Macbeth, Lear. So the question is just too broad, and I'm going to cop out and not answer it.
Fair enough, Angie.
I'm afraid I'm going to be with Leigh as well, because there are so many writers that I absolutely love, and if I start naming them, I'm going to miss somebody out. But some of the sort of like more the older ones are like, I'm a huge Sidney Sheldon fan, and if I start a book of his, I've read them all twice, and once I start I can't stop. But right now I read so many the crime writers, and because I'm not one for carrying on a book that I'm not enjoying. So, you know, pretty much every book, crime book that I do read, I do enjoy. So yeah, I'm exactly the same. There are just so many fabulous crime writers out there at the moment. I'm constantly trying to gobble them all up and, you know, enjoy all what's out there on offer. But obviously, you know, we don't have the time. You know, there are lots, and I think we've got a really, really rich crop of crime writers at the moment. I really do. I think we're fabulous with crime at the moment.
And Liz?
Yeah, I'm gonna say somebody. I love Stuart McBride's books, and I think he's probably maybe not the only author that I would go out and buy his book as soon as it comes on the market. But I think, yeah, he's very, 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 very high up. I think I've tried to emulate his style of writing in mine. I like the humour, I like the Scottishness, I like the darkness of it, and so I think that's what puts him so high up in my list. Also the fact that I want to be Roberta Steele when it finally gets on the telly, because I think I can do a bit of this old rummaging around with my bra and whatnot. So yeah, Stuart McBride definitely. But as Angela and Leigh both said, there are so many out there that are absolutely stunning writers, and yeah, you know, it's getting harder and harder to. I'm just doing that because somebody's just put a comment in. If it's David Gilchrist, yes, you do recognise my necklace. Sorry. Yeah. So yeah, Stuart McBride's my absolute favourite, but there's loads and loads of other people as well.
Excellent. And then there's a question coming from Samantha Brownlee. She says, is there any subjects that you wouldn't write about? Shall we start with Leigh?
Yes. I mean, I don't want to give any spoilers, but yes, there are certainly areas I would not write about because I don't want to go there in my head. I would never torture or harm a child because I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother. I don't want to take myself there in my imagination. For me, and this sounds very paradoxical, but for me, crime and writing crime is an escape. And I want to escape into places where I feel comfortable, like, you know, good old murders. So, yes, and I wouldn't write graphically about rape because, again, that's not somewhere I want to go in my head. I'm not saying that my books are cosy. People do get killed, and they get killed in quite grisly ways sometimes, where the character of the killer demands that. I don't think I ever write gratuitous violence. That doesn't inspire me. And I do feel that once you get in here, we're all more or less the same. It's what's up here that interests me. It's what's going on inside people's heads. That's what intrigues me, and that's what I write about, getting inside the psyche of the killer. So yes, there are areas I would not write about, and I try not to make things shocking just for the sake of it. I think things have to be shocking within the context of the characters and the novel. But my answer to that is very much yes, there are areas I would not write about. I try very hard not to be offensive to anybody. In fact, I don't find that too difficult because I don't think I'm a particularly offensive person. I'm a very, very tolerant person by nature, and I think we should. I think if everybody just made an effort to be kind to one another, the world could be so much better a place. So being nasty is not really in my nature, and yet, you know, there's obviously a sliver of me that can go there and delve into these sorts of characters. So in answer to the question, very definitely there are areas I do not want to go, and so I don't go there because I want to enjoy my writing. I don't want to traumatize myself or give myself nightmares. Although I have, I think, you know, a few people have said, I mean, one reader said to me she doesn't like to walk in her local park after reading my debut novel. That was not my intention at all.
Angie, I know there's some quite dark threads in some of your books. So are there things you wouldn't write about?
I'd definitely struggle on the subject of animal cruelty because I'm a huge animal lover, and I did write a scene in one of the earlier books, and it was purely to demonstrate the viciousness of a character and just how cold and ruthless this character was. It isn't something that I would want to do again. As regards subjects, there are a few subjects that I would actively keep away from, but it's for me it's looking at exactly what Leigh said, which is making sure that no subject is sensationalized or used for gratuitous reasons. One of the hardest books I wrote was Dead Souls, which was about hate crimes, and the research for that really did cause me to have to walk away from the desk many times because of blood and the effect that had on me doing the research. The horrific things that have being done to people, purely because of the colour of their skin or their nationality or their sexuality. It really, really affected me quite badly. A lot of stuff I didn't use in the actual book, but it kept the tone. And also I find as long as I make sure that Kim has the right reaction to whatever the subject is, but like in that book about hate crimes, Kim obviously found anything hate crime related abhorrent, and at one point she threw up due to what she was finding out. So then the reader can identify with Kim's reaction to the subject matter. But again, I don't use sensationalized details or gratuitous violence. It's only what's necessary to move the story forward and characterize and that's all. So I certainly wouldn't want to do anything that would be offensive. So I think for me it's trying to cover the subject as sensitively as I can. In my books there are quite a lot of physically challenged or mentally challenged people, and again it's a subject that as long as it's handled sensitively and there's a point to it, then it's okay.
And Liz?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that I wouldn't explore, but as Leigh and Angie have both said, it would be from the point of view of showing how horrific something is, and it wouldn't be using gratuitous descriptions or it wouldn't be for gratuitous reasons. I mean, I've written Untainted Blood was about racism and homophobia, and the research I did for that was, as Angie said, it was horrible. It was just but what I wrote in the book, although quite dark, was a lot more tempered than the research I had done. And also the book that's just been released, the Nikki book, Broken Silence, is about modern day slavery. And again, my research took me into some very dark places. And although the book itself is dark, it isn't as dark as some of the places I went to in my research. And I sort of think, for me, part of the reason I write crime fiction is because I want to talk about the social issues. I want to talk about things that are happening in society. And as Angie was saying, use my characters' reactions and their moral code, if you like, to just show how wrong these things are. And I think that's, so from that point of view, I don't think there's anything I wouldn't explore. But having said that, when I'm writing the dark bits, I tend to keep those sections quite short because they affect me so much. And the sort of other bits, the lighter bits, the humour that I inject into the novels, they're the bits that help to lighten it for me so that I can allow myself the darkness, but then step away from it and do something else as well. I hope that explains it.
Before I move on to another question off the stream, I'm going to sneak this one in because I ask Liz it every time I see her. And then hopefully the others will ask it as well. Liz, when are we getting a spin-off novella about Mo?
I was toying with doing a spin-off novella with Jojo, who was a character that I created in my last Goss book, Unseen Evil, because I loved Jojo. And I really had a bit of a train of thought about his backstory and how that could sort of, perhaps be a novella. Mo, I don't know. I can't quite. I love Mo, and he's in my books, and he's an amazing character to write. I don't know. I don't quite know what subject matter I would follow with Mo. I could go back perhaps to to that incident where he killed somebody, I suppose, and explore that a bit more in a novella. I don't know. And I don't know if readers like novellas, and I don't know how many words a novella should have either. And I don't know if I could limit my words to fit in with a novella. There's lots of questions there.
Fair enough. Andy, would you write any spin-off novellas about characters?
I'm exactly the same as Liz. I think for me, a novella would turn into a full piece of work, because I just don't know when to shut up, basically. And I would just keep going on, and another story would occur to me, and another story would occur to me, and it would probably turn into a series all of its own. So, but like we said earlier, never say never.
Yeah. And Leigh, what about you?
Well, I did write the trilogy for Ian Peterson, which I suppose was a spin-off, really. And yes, a few people have asked if I would write a spin-off about Sam, Geraldine's sergeant in London, but I think there's kind of a limit to how many spin-offs I have time to write, really. I'm currently writing 2 Geraldine Steeles a year, and the other problem that I think that can arise if you're writing concurrent series about characters whose lives coincide is that you have to be careful. I mean, when I was writing the Ian Peterson trilogy, and I was still writing the Geraldine Steele series, and their stories were running, as I say, concurrently, because they visited each other in each other's novels. So in terms of keeping everything consistent, it took some thought. And there was one point when I can't remember which way around it was, but one of them was visiting a post-mortem, and I realised they were talking to the pathologist. It was either Geraldine in London talking to the pathologist who worked in York, or Ian in York talking to the pathologist who worked in London, because I just got the two muddled up in my head because they were both happening at the same time. So I think probably I won't do another spin-off while I'm writing Geraldine Steele. Once I've written the 20 books in the series, if we then decide not to continue, because there has to be a resolution to Geraldine's story herself at some point, but then I might move to a spin-off series. I don't know. But at the moment, no further plans for a spin-off, because I find it complicated enough, really, to keep abreast of what's going on in one series, let alone to have 2 that are running at the same time, that are both supposed to be happening at the same time.
And then we got another question from Samantha. She said, what are your most memorable moments as authors? Shall we start with Liz this time?
Oh, no.
Oh, goodness. Oh, sorry, did you say Liz?
Yes.
Sorry,
right.
Like
most memorable... I don't know, really. I just, every time I go into a library to do a library event, or any time I get an email from somebody or a Facebook comment from somebody saying that they've enjoyed my writing, that's memorable for me. It's just, perhaps the most memorable, though, was when I went back up to my home village in Scotland. And when I left it was quite a small village in between Edinburgh and Glasgow, near Livingston. It's called West Calder. And I went there and I'd said to the local library, I'll do a bit of an event. And it was such a lovely event there. The library was there when I was a kid, changed a bit, not the outside, because it's still the same old building, but inside it changed. But it was just so nice to go back to a library that I had spent so much time in as a kid. And sometimes I'd go to the library 2 or 3 times a day to change my books because I'd read them so quickly. and to have people there was people that I vaguely remembered who were relatives or distant relatives of my mum and dad's, and people who remembered my mum and dad, and it was lovely. So I think that was quite memorable. You know, because my mum and dad had both died by the time I was published, so they never actually saw me as a published author. And so I think that's probably the most memorable thing for me. Yeah, definitely.
Lovely. Angie?
I think for me it was when on the publishing side, it was when Silent Scream got to #1 on Amazon. And there's been, you know, a lot of things that have happened since, but that was so far beyond any expectation I could ever have had. And the same for my publisher, because it was their first #1 as well. That the excitement felt by everybody was just something that, you know, I would never ever forget. So there's been lots of, I mean, I couldn't even name, you know, the fabulous things that have happened in the last, you know, 5 years. There are just so many. But the expectation I had for Silent Scream, and, you know, I said the other day when, you know, the publisher said, how many do you think you might sell? I said, you know, I'd have been happy at 500, because that's 500 people reading your work, and up until that point nobody had been reading my work. So that was a fabulous, you know, even that would have been a fabulous achievement. So Silent Scream just kept performing out of its skin, and I still call it, you know, the little bookie that changed my life. So that Sunday morning where literally, you know, everybody at Booker was jumping up and down, everybody was trying to blow it in the right direction, and you know, that was just so exciting. I'll never ever forget that, ever.
Leigh?
Oh, again, there have been so many. I mean, I think when I first signed my first publishing deal, that was just an unbelievable moment to actually have a publisher. It meant that I had a license to keep scribbling all the time, because I was now going to be a published author. I think when we sold the TV option, that was really exciting, and going from a meeting at the TV studio. It was very exciting when my other trilogy was commissioned, and one of the books is set in the Seychelles, so we had to go out to Seychelles to research the area. That was fantastic, and the Minister for Tourism and Leisure from the Seychelles actually flew over to London to attend the launch for that book. So that was a pretty exciting event. And also, as Angie said, when Geraldine Steele got to #1 on Kindle, that was very exciting. And I didn't realise at the time what a big deal it was, really, until champagne arrived from my publisher, and I thought, wow, this has got to be something special if he's sending champagne. Actually, he's going to watch this, so I won't say anymore. But there have also been other memorable moments doing research for the books. So the time that I spent in a woman's closed prison, talking to the prisoners and listening to what they'd been doing, was really memorable. And the research that I did for my latest book, Deathly Affair, I researched the rough sleepers. I visited homeless shelters, Changing Lives shelters, and that was really, really interesting. So, because I think one of the things that makes crime fiction very interesting is that it can explore different social issues and look at the way in which we live as individuals, how we deal with challenges and problems as individuals, but also how we deal with things as a society. And of course, as a crime writer, we have no answers, but we can raise these questions. And so I do quite a lot of research for the issues that I'm looking at in my books, and places that I would never normally go, that I sometimes go to, are quite memorable. So it's been a really, really interesting ride, this writing lark. But I couldn't pick on one particular experience, really. But I always say, and I come back to this, the biggest thrill is the writing. You know, don't you, girls? When you write something and it's exactly what you wanted to say. And it's a really strange phenomenon, isn't it? Through just squiggles on a page, something that's in my head is somehow conveyed into somebody else's mind. it's so mysterious and magical, isn't it? And I find that really, really exciting.
Can I just pop in there and say, I've always said, Leigh, there is nothing as satisfying as writing a good sentence, and make of that what you will.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
We've got about 5 minutes left of our chat. So I'm going to give you maybe one last question, which is what's coming up next for all of you? And we'll start with Leigh. So what's coming up next for you, Leigh?
I'm currently writing the 16th Geraldine Steele, and I have to remember, the 14th, which is called Deadly Revenge, is out in July, and the one after that, which is has just been edited and is about to be proofread, is coming out, I think, in January. My latest one, I'll just have a little plug, we're allowed, aren't we? My latest one, Deathly Affair, came out not that long ago. So it's all Geraldine Steele for me at the moment.
Great. And Angie, what's coming up next for you?
Exactly the same. I'm working on book 13 in the Kingstown series, which will be later this year. Normally, I'm a spring and autumn time publishing, so, and then it'll be straight on to the next after that. So yeah, exactly the same. More and more, Kim. So that's it for me. Sorry, that's the short answer again.
What's the most recent one that you've got out?
Killing Mind is the most recent one. I kept it. There we go. I've never known camera is, you know. There we go.
We've got you on camera this time.
that was out week and a half ago, so it'll be about 6 months until the next, roughly.
And Liz, what about you?
I'm working on the 7th Gus book at the minute. I've got a competition going over on my website for somebody to name the book, because I am, I started with these books. That was the last one in the series, Unseen Evil. And now I need another title. So yeah, I've just sent off my third Nikki one. The second one, Broken Silence, came out last month. It's not out in paperback until July, I think. And I've got an idea for the next Nikki one as well, which will be, it'll be coming out after I can't tell you the title of the third one, but I'm working on the Next Again one as well. So yeah, busy. And this is my last year of my PhD, so I've got to really crack on with that and get my academic stuff written for that. So yeah, busy months ahead, I think.
So does that mean that the next time we see you, Liz, we'll be calling you Dr. Liz?
Gosh, yeah. Oh, that's going to be a bit weird, isn't it? Doctor of Creative Writing. I look forward to the question, is there a doctor in the house? And I can say, yes! But not really. Yeah.
That's wonderful. It's been a pleasure talking to all of you ladies. I'm sorry that we haven't got everybody's questions in time. I'm sure lots of people will be heading over. We've already got a suggestion for your next title, Liz.
I know it's a good title.
But yeah, it's been a real pleasure. I think you made a lot of readers' days coming over and talking to us. So thanks for heading over.
Thanks you very much.
It's been lovely.
Lovely. So it's just time to say goodbye to everyone in the book group.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.